All right. Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Navigating the Intentional Life. This is Justin Copeland. I am your host, your creator. And I'm excited about our podcast today because the man that I'm speaking to is honestly he's a different breed of man. And that was the excitement that pushed me to reaching out to him. So I'm thankful that he agreed to sit down and speak with me this morning. He is a father of two, a husband, somebody that I see that stands firmly on his belief systems. He is also an Ironman multiple times over. The man that I'm speaking of is Chris Boettcher. Chris, great to have you on this morning, man.
Morning, Justin. I appreciate the invite. It's a pleasure to join you here this morning.
Yeah, one of the things that, excuse me, I didn't say in that buildup, that massive buildup to this huge podcast, was that you also do a podcast. And one of the things that I love about having fellow podcasters on is you get the flow, you get the rhythm, right? You get those moments where it's like, hey, here's a little nice spot to plug. So right out of the gate, man, I want to give you the floor to tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so long story short, my brother and I we kind of went through a rough stretch. He's a physical therapist as well. He's over in the Colorado area. I'm over in South Carolina, and we just decided about last October, after doing a bunch of self-education and just kind of spinning our wheels, that we needed to do something. And we didn't really know what that looked like. We had a lot of frustrations with the healthcare system. The more we learned about the financial system, both of us had quite a bit of student debt to deal with. And we just decided, okay, let's just start unpacking some of this stuff. And so we just started talking about some different topics, just the two of us, and one thing kind of led to another, and here we are today, just building this network, connecting with people like you, and yeah, it's just been pretty amazing to just kind of share our story, and then also just build those bridges with a lot of men who are also trying to do something bigger than themselves, and that's really kind of lit a fire under me, and I know my brother Brett as well. And not really sure where it's going, but we're enjoying the process, and it's opened up some other doors to some opportunities that I'm sure we'll talk about here later this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that stands out from what you're saying there, because I do feel like this is one of those where there's so much to unpack that it's probably going to have to be a multiple podcast kind of thing. But right out of the gate, it makes me think of that saying, the man that loves to walk is going to walk further than the man that loves the destination. Right. But before you even start that, before you even get into a cute quote like that, you've got to find an action that you want to take and then take it. And so many people, and kind of what you're saying there, they don't see that it's just getting started. If you just get going, you take that first step, pun intended, because I know we're going to talk about the Ironman stuff, but it's amazing how it unfolds, right? We were talking offline, and maybe you and your brother, you said, Brett, right? You had that direction of, hey, we do want to speak to other men. We do want to find this arena because we feel like there's definitely a need for the message that we have. When I started navigating the intentional life, it was really meant for mindset. It was meant to try to help people that maybe they were set there stuck and didn't know how to take that first step. They knew they might know that they wanted to do something, but how to overcome that fear that they were disguising as practicality that kept them stagnant was really where it was at. I wanted guys like you, the Boyds, the Zachs, all these people that have this story where they'd kind of arrived on their journey, at least to the point where they first set their milestone, to say, no, look, this is where it started. This is how I started. And, we joked on, offline, like when I started my podcast, I literally was sitting in my closet with my phone on the Anchor app. But I didn't give a shit because a lot of people would go, well, I need the studio. I need the mixer. I need the microphone. I need, this, and this. And I was like, no, I just want to go because the content's what's going to be important. Right. So kind of intentionally starting with you saying, oh, I've got this podcast. I wanted to reverse engineer and tell my listeners that maybe don't know who you are, don't know your story, kind of how you got started. I think the thing we said, about the email that you sent me was that you were very much involved in sports growing up. So always an athletic person, liked that challenge, liked pushing your body. But that took you into college and you competed in college, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so going through high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I loved college basketball, or I love basketball. It was my passion. I grew up in the gym. My dad coached everything. Me and my three brothers, we were gym rats, and so I, I mean, I would say below average athleticism guy. I could shoot, but when it comes to college basketball, I was fairly limited in my potential there. But I hadn't convinced myself at 17, 18 years old. I still thought I was capable. And I was less, I hate to say school came fairly easy to me, but I didn't really feel like I ever had to put a lot of effort into it. And I was able to kind of go through the motions with high school and do what I need to do. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was just like, well, I know I want to play basketball. So I found a school that just happened to have physical therapy. And so like, that sounds good. I can be around athletics and continue to play there. And I also ran a lot of track and was reasonably successful with that as well. So I ended up doing both. And the interesting part about it is when I went to college, I only played for a year. I just lost my passion for basketball. It no longer became fun for me anymore. And that left a little bit of a void, but I just was like, well, I still have track here and I still really enjoyed the competition of it. And I think that's what I kind of said this in what I emailed you as well, is that it allowed me to kind of distract myself from not really being sold on what I was doing. I was interested in the sciences and the anatomy and all that kind of stuff, but I just always had this feeling in my gut that there was something more. And so then from there, I finished up undergrad. Just decided that I had a friend of mine who was like, we should get bikes. And he was a decathlete, so him and I were both, still pretty fit coming out of our senior year of college track. And so we just got bikes and then started riding, and we're going to do a little sprint triathlon, maybe an Olympic triathlon. And he had a friend who had just signed up for Ironman Louisville and was like, you guys got to go do this with us. And at 22 years old, we were like, sure, why not? And I had about a 7-month gap between undergrad and starting grad school for physical therapy. And again, it just, looking back on it, it served as my purpose, even if I didn't feel like I was that purpose driven with what I was doing academically. And I just poured into it for 7 months, and we had a pretty sweet situation where we were doing some like private event bartending stuff at night. And from there, being able to pretty much train all day long. So it was a perfect setup for a couple of, college kids that were just trying to do some nonsense as far as training goes, and ended up going down to our first race and was fortunate enough to put it together and made it out to Kona. And that was 6 weeks later. And that kind of wrote my history for a few years, because at that point I was into it. Like I had fell in love with the sport of Ironman triathlon, and I carried that. I didn't race much in college or as far as grad school goes, but I was training my tail off, and I was doing a little bit here and a little bit there, knowing that as soon as I finished up the grind of grad school, that I was going to go for it for a while. And so, yeah, I finished up grad school, and once again, just kept looking at things going, this still doesn't feel like what I'm supposed to be doing, but this is what society has kind of told me I need to do. Find a well-paying job that is plenty of job opportunities out there. And I don't know, it's just one of those things that I've always kind of challenged that narrative in my head, but never took any action with it. And so then from there, I went into my career. At that point, I was interested in physical therapy, don't get me wrong, but I thought I was going to go out there and like change the world. And I just realized that the healthcare system very quickly was not going to allow that to happen. I was going to be very limited, and I was going to be seeing way more patients than what I wanted to be. But I had Ironman. And so Ironman then created this opportunity for me to continue to push my purpose, and I continued to gain success there. And over the course of the next about 5 to 6 years, I ended up doing 8 more races and Did 10 Ironmans total and got out to Kona 3 different times. And it was just, I mean, it was everything to me. But it really changed when, so I qualified for my last race in October of, I think it was 2015. And the following May, my wife and I got married. And the interesting thing about that October qualification is it's the first qualifier for the next year. So I literally had an entire year before I could go race. And so I spent the first like 6 months of our marriage training for Ironman. And it at that point was when I realized it was becoming too much of my identity and it was taking away from what I wanted to be as a husband.
There's something
And
there. There's something there that I want to jump in because going back to college, right?
Mhm.
That statement you made about I knew there was something more. I felt like I had something more, but felt the need that I had to go down this path. And right out of the gate, I go, this is somebody. You look at guys that are first responders, you look at guys that go into the military, you look at guys that do things like, the Zach Smalls of the world, yourself. There's a calling. There's a need to almost build community, and really what that calling is service, right? What the way I see this, the way I see what we do, what we're putting ourselves into is another line of service, right? For other men. But the thing that stands out to me to that is, and I struggle with this right now with my own children, is what is school doing, government education doing to help or push people that have that extra thing inside, that calling inside. I mean, I believe we all have it to find a path that's not essentially conformity. That's not saying, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. Go to college, get out of college, get that 9 to 5, work that 9 to 5 until you're 55, 60 something years old, then retire. Now you can start to live your life. Right? There's no direction there. You've got to take that. You've got to have that initiative on your own. And I can tell you right now, the first thing that kind of came to my mind that I want to joke about is like, shit, at 22, I was having a good time. I mean, I was on the cusp of the military and but I was enjoying life. I wasn't running Ironman. I wasn't thinking like, oh man, I need to dive into my fitness. I'd spent my whole life playing soccer. College ball didn't work out for me. But I'd always been athletic. I'd always been in shape, but I kind of moved away from that. Instead of taking on something like you did and having that obsession, I think my obsession became just being free, not having anyone telling me that I had to. Of course, I say that, and then I went into the military. But that to me was something I could control. That was that next challenge for me, and I needed that. And at no point in my life, in my upbringing, if someone said, you're somebody that really likes to face obstacles, you're somebody that really likes to take on that next thing that pushes you mentally, physically, and spiritually, right? And I think that's something that's missing. And I think that's something that I try to incorporate into my own kids' lives, going like, hey, I mean, unless you want to specialize in college, I don't really see a path for you there just to get a degree. Now I can argue why, that piece of paper would help if you want to go into corporate America, but I'm more interested on what's your calling, what's your passion, what do you want to do, who do you want to be? You know what I'm saying? And if somebody had that conversation with me when I was 18, 19 years old, or shit, back when I was 14 years old and starting to think that I was a man and all that, how different would my path have gone, right? I mean, we'll never know. I'm very happy with where I'm at now. But do you understand what I'm saying with that? Like, there's so much there in what you said that if somebody had been able to see that and said, hey, Chris, you don't have to play it safe. I mean, a very respectable career field, right? Like, I thought about PT. I saw the hours you had to put into it, and I was like, fuck that. Like, I'm like, no, can I get the 120 hour bachelor's? I'm good, But if somebody came and said, hey, whatever that is, figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, are you feeling that with me right now? Because that's what I took from it. I was like, oh, that's such a big thing that you're saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, at that age, we view risk so differently, and at least I do in my life now. As far as to me, the most risky behavior is to not take any risk at all, and that's something that I continue to remind myself every day with the process that I'm going through right now. But yeah, we just do a terrible job of helping people and helping kids. And I say kids, college kids are, I mean, to me, they're still kids at that age. I mean, there's so much development going on. And especially in today's world, we don't have a lot of real life experience at that age to help kids understand who the hell they are and when what they actually care about. And, something as simple now. And I talk about this a lot on my Twitter feed is like just being alone. I mean, we're so bombarded with everybody else's ideas all day long, and we almost feel this like anxiety or this panic now if we're like sitting by ourselves with like no phone, no social media, no Netflix to binge, or just no conversations with our friends. Like we need to do a better job of just being able to figure out who we are and be confident and comfortable in that.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know who you are, it's very very easy to take what the world tells you and feel like, oh yeah, that's fact, that's what I have to just accept and move forward. Because I think that's what I did. And I'll be honest, I don't regret any of the decisions that I made because it's led me to where I am today, and I'm not sure that the opportunities that I'm seeing today I get to if I don't follow the path that I followed. And so now I think it gives me an opportunity to show people that there is another opportunity out there and there are different ways, but you have to be able to consistently challenge yourself, get uncomfortable, and be able to step out and just not be afraid of what the world is trying to tell you to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. The regret thing, it makes me think of, it's somewhat of an echo chamber at this point. And honestly, I haven't quite yet figured out where I hang my hat on this, but you see a lot of people say that growth is only achieved through pain. Growth is only achieved through loss, right? Which is just part of the family of pain, right? The house of pain. I think that's true. I mean, as a professional coach for 10 years, I used to get uncomfortable when my teams would just win, because you start to believe something that isn't necessarily there, because around the corner, there's always someone better. There's always someone bigger. And it's just a matter of time before you run into them. Right. And I was always looking for that around the corner, because there is a lot to learn from when we lose. And that's when we test ourselves, being an Ironman, I know there are countless numbers of miles where you wanted to stop, where your body was saying, I hurt, I don't want to do this. And we are so defined by what we do when we don't want to do something. But that regret aspect of that pain is, I look back and I go, I don't have regrets either. I don't know that a lot of people can say that, because regret typically comes from inaction. Typically, right? There's some actions that I've done where I'm like, I regret that. But, it's something that most of the guys, the people that sit down on this podcast, they can kind of say the same thing, because they go, well, I was choosing a path. I chose that path. I went hard into that path. And here's the thing about life. Your passions are going to change. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it was wrong. It doesn't mean that you weren't fully passionate about that thing that you were doing. It just means that thing that you're passionate about, it's ran its course. And now you've adapted and you've grown and you've changed. I mean, you're a father of two. And what happens when you have a child is your whole world, that view changes. You start seeing things you didn't see before. You stop seeing things that you saw before, because now they're not as important or they're irrelevant. And so then therefore your passions of what you want to do start to shift. And I think people get really, really lost in that. And that to me is kind of a segue where you go, I was training for 6 months for the first year of my marriage. My identity was Ironman, which makes sense, because you're talking about, I love the thing about being alone, because we are truly forced to find ourselves and face ourselves when we do spend time alone. And that's something that with, my oldest is 15. So we got 3 years until he's 18. He wants to get a camper and travel the United States whenever he's done with high school. I'm like, all right, cool. Thing is, we've got to put some wheels in motion here, but I want him to do it, because if he truly does it the way that he's saying he's wanting to do it, he's going to have to be by himself, which means he's going to have to get comfortable in those quiet moments where he doesn't have the Netflix to binge. He doesn't have people answering their phones. He's going to have to learn to be okay with him. And I think that's invaluable regardless of everything else that comes with it. You know what I'm saying? Because then you find yourself at whatever age going, my identity has been this now for so long, but I'm married. Now what? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one of those things where whether I mean, I was able to spend a ton of time alone on the bike, and certainly that shaped who I was. But I think that I wasn't able to really reflect past myself until I was married and until I had children. And so then like you said, I had a very narrow vision. And now I just see the world very, very differently. And I see it as, I don't want to say that it was like a selfish perspective, but I think it's natural. You know, when you're a single male and you're just kind of doing something you're really passionate about and you're pretty successful at it, I mean, you start to kind of you feel pretty good about yourself, and you don't really look at the world. You don't really look at the world as an opportunity for you to make a positive change because you're just worried about yourself. And then now I see the world so differently, and maybe that's just because I've gotten older and experienced a few more things. And of course, but now you have that responsibility of having children and what that does, and just being able to reflect on that and just that responsibility and that blessing that is. And I think that as once I don't want to say hit rock bottom when I left Ironman and I was married, we had our first child, and then I just was stuck in this system that I wasn't happy with. And I found myself just numb, and I put all of my ambitions into chasing dollars. And I was listening to all kinds of podcasts and just learning as much about money as I possibly could, because I'll be honest, my graduate school taught me absolutely nothing about being financially literate. And so I was kind of dumped into the world with a mountain of student debt and felt like I had zero skills to figure it out. So I did feel like that was my responsibility to figure that out, because those loans were my decision and something that I needed to deal with. I wasn't looking for, a handout to be able to take care of those. I knew they were mine, but that became a pretty big burden. And I mean, my wife will tell you, like, I was pretty empty for a few years, and I look back on like the first 2 years of our daughter's life, and that was kind of just leading up to when COVID started. And I definitely regret that, because I was going through the motions in life, and I just didn't really have any purpose whatsoever. And COVID was the best thing that happened to me personally, because it forced me to deal with myself, realize that there is no purpose in what you're doing, that you need to make some changes. That doesn't necessarily have to start with a career, but you need to start taking intentional steps forward and figuring out who you are. And so for me, it was things like journaling and breath work and getting back to some fitness. Because I had busted my face off for years, and then got to the point where if I was exercising once a week, like that was it. Like it was a crazy transition. And I think that certainly didn't help to keep me from feeling that purposelessness. And so then from there, yeah, we just decided. My brother, like I said, he was in a similar situation out in Colorado Springs, and just going through the motions. And we just at that point we're like, okay, we've got to do something. We've taken some steps now with our own, just building ourselves up mentally and physically with our routines. But there's something bigger than this coming. And we didn't really know what it was, but we just decided the podcast felt like the best opportunity for us to step out of our comfort zones, to take that actionable step and see where things go. Because,
So,
go ahead.
it's, not to cut you off, but man, you say so many things that the underlining current is profound. And I don't know if you know that about yourself. I don't know if that's intentional, but the part about kind of just listing in life, the fact that you got to a point where you said, I wasn't even working out, but maybe once a week. I got just obsessed with trying to figure out my finances. And I was just doing what essentially I've been fed to believe that we're supposed to do, and what I hear is complacency. And so the reason I want to bring that out is because there's so many people right now that probably listen to your podcast, so many men that listen to your podcast, that might listen to my podcast, that they find themselves in that same dynamic, where these jobs, the 9 to 5, and I'm not saying that 9 to 5 is a bad thing. And I don't mean that. I don't want that to be the perception of it, but man, we've still got caveman genetics in us. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need the fire. We need the excitement. We need to feel danger. You know what I mean? We need to feel that challenge. And, when you're doing something like Ironman, there's an element of danger to what you're doing. Just, I talked to Boyd, and I'm sure you've got your stories as well. Just some of the shit that happens just entering the water. I didn't even think about that. Like, you can get your ass kicked in the water trying to swim. I didn't know that. I didn't even think about it. But there's an element there that men are missing, and the depression rates, the alcoholism, suicide rates. It makes sense because we're not meant to be so stagnant. And so my point to what you've kind of brought out there was, you started finding that thing again that, it was a physical, right? You had to get physical again to start to refine yourself now, because you are looking at the world differently. And that's the beauty of aging, because you can take, like, from a young man, like you're saying, is you can get an obsession and just run with it. And because you're younger, because there are, I want to say, less responsibilities, you can really hone in on that one thing and go nuts. Right. But as you grow and you build a family, that ability to be obsessed has to shift a bit. You have to control the chaos, is kind of how I like to put it, because you can still be fully obsessed with something, but still have time with your family. Right. You can be fully obsessed with something, but still do your job. And I think as we get older, that's where we learn a little bit more to control that chaos. But the point in what you were saying to me was, for somebody that's listening right now, what you have to hear is, if you're feeling this way, that first call to action is to find that thing that gets you moving again, whether it's literal, or not. You find that thing that gets you moving, because this is something, and I love the fact that you said COVID is kind of what woke you up, because I've got so many friends, man, they put on the COVID 40, in those 2 years. Like, they weren't active. They didn't take, they just looked at it as an opportunity to drink way more than what they were before, because now they're working from home and didn't know what to do with their time. Whereas you and me, I started the podcast, you started the podcast, right? You took that time and took advantage of it. You know what I mean? And I think that's huge. Again, the point there is these actionable steps to the next venture in your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're only given one step, and it's our choice whether we take it or not. You brought up COVID. I think I see it as a lot, like kind of a Y, where you either, if you veered to the right, you probably leveled up, which was not very many people, based off of, my community and the people that I interact with regularly. And so I think we're kind of in this space now where there's a lot of opportunity to kind of bring people along and sort of light a torch. And that's what I look at, what you and I are doing right now is we've got to be able to get things going again and get into our communities and be able to build each other back up again. And I think it starts with just helping people to find that self-belief again. For me, that numbness, that purposelessness, like I lost confidence in myself. And I had done some pretty amazing things over the previous 10 years, and I was still just feeling inadequate, and that my only purpose was to be a provider monetarily for my family. And I think that's something that men kind of latch onto as well, is, they not only are we just trying to chase dollars, but we're using that as sort of a badge of honor of, well, I work 60, 70, 80 hour weeks, and I work so hard. Well, that's great, but like, are you present as a husband? Are you present as a father? There's no balance there. And if you can only wear one hat and you never put the other hats on, and you just leave them there and pretend like they don't exist because you're taking care of business on one end, I'm sorry, but that's only a small, percentage of what we're called to be doing.
And that's old school thinking too, with the whole, I work so hard, I work the 60, 70, 80 hour weeks. We've got a technology base that if you can't figure out how to not do that, you're behind.
Agreed.
It's just a fact, and then what blows my mind, and look, I'm not some hypocrite. I don't have it all figured out. I'm not the second coming of Jesus when it comes to relationships, but like I've been divorced, but I talk to a lot of guys because of that experience in my life that I mean, God bless them. Like they sit there and they go, I worked my ass off. I busted my ass. And like you said, I was working the 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I'm like, there you go. And you're surprised she's banging your neighbor. You were not there. You were not there. And if you don't understand the emotional necessities of a woman, we've got a long way to go. Right. Because to your point, obviously I bring it a lot more brashness, but you have to be present. You have to be present as a husband, as a father, and throwing yourself into the rat race and not seeing that there's a better way to step back based on, you taking control over your own life. A lot of guys are afraid to do that. It's a scary thing, right? To step back and say, I'm going to take charge of this. And I know for you, you've experienced that firsthand. I mean, from COVID to the podcast to just a month ago, I believe you said, with your own profession, with your own job.
Yeah. So, I mean, I firmly believe that, God is at the heart of all of this, and everything was setting up for a reason. I didn't know exactly what that was, but, we started the podcast in October, had no idea what we were doing, felt nervous as all hell sitting in front of that microphone the first time, even if I was just, across the country talking to my brother through Zoom call. It still just felt, and I'm sure you can appreciate that. Just like the first time you step in front of a mic, it's a very overwhelming experience the first couple of times. But as I got more comfortable with it, I was like, okay, this is what I need to lean into. Anything that makes me feel like that microphone did that first day, like I need to keep doing that. And so that's sort of what I've really pushed myself towards is just trying to lean into that level of discomfort. And the more that I did that, the more my self-belief grew, my confidence, and my network, because I was just able to continue to meet more and more like-minded people. And so then January rolled around, I guess December, and we got an email basically saying, if you don't get the vaccine, you're subject to losing your job January 4th. And so I was like, okay, well, here we are. So as of about December the 12th, I was fully prepared to just take on this next step in life and move into the development space and coaching and just being able to just build men. And was able to have a couple of conversations with people, and they kind of pushed me towards, okay, you should really at least try the religious exemption route. So, which I did, and I felt pretty strongly with that, and I was granted it. But that was a complete game changer for me, because I was never again going to be put in a situation where someone else had the authority to limit me from providing for my family. And from that moment on, it was like, okay, I'm still working, but this is a very temporary thing because I'm going to keep building for something else. And then everything came full circle about a month ago now, where I spoke up on a couple of different things, and we have a lot of documentation that goes along with home health. And anyways, I don't think they were very happy with me for a while based on just being outspoken and things like that. Well, there was an opportunity, and they took advantage of it. And it's funny that being fired, I just in my head had expected it to be like a kind of a terrifying experience. And I guess in a way, maybe it still was. But when I was terminated, it honestly was like a relief.
Yeah.
And as soon as it happened, I was like, let's go. Like, I just felt like that safety net was removed and it was go time.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, it's certainly my wife stays at home with our kids and everything. And so I'm the sole provider. So being in that situation where all of a sudden you go from an income to no income and having to figure that out for yourself, it's a scary feeling.
Yeah.
But I have worried less about money the last month than I have in the previous probably 4 or 5 years. And it's such a weird transition, and that's hard for me to even explain, but that tells me everything I need to know right now about where I'm supposed to be. And each and every week I feel like I'm being pushed forward, that there's consistently steps being taken and doors being opened. And so yeah, it's been a pretty unbelievable ride thus far.
Yeah. How long were you doing the podcast before you got terminated for being outspoken?
It was about 8 months.
8 months. Do you feel like, and I think this is funny, and maybe I think I know the answer to this, but when you start doing the podcast and you start putting yourself out there, like you're talking about, it is nerve wracking, right? Especially when you get into you start talking to some of these people that maybe they've been doing it for a bit. And so they've got their voice and you're trying to find your voice. And that's the point I'm, kind of wanted to get to, is that the podcast for me and the men that I've been able to speak to, it's really reminded me of the confidence that I used to carry, because I think as men, we need to be able to identify ourselves to something, right? We've got to have a mission. We've got to have, I've used calling a lot, and I don't want it to be cliche and overused, but we do need that thing, that battle, right? In a sense, even in the piece, to work towards. And so in doing your podcast, you kind of find your voice, right? How much do you feel like that podcast played into your ability? Or maybe you've always been this way, but how much do you feel like that played into you stepping up to your work and saying, no, we're not going to do it this way, or I'm not going to do it this way, or whatever that case? How much do you feel that it played into it?
I have been always fairly outspoken, but I think it did. I think the longer that this transition with work went on, in terms of some of the things that were going on with insurance and visit limitations and things like that, I just reached a point where it was like, okay, there's no turning back here. And I think previously I would have had some kind of a filter, and I think the filter has slowly kind of whittled away over the past several months. And so yeah, it's a situation where and I think the COVID stuff helped with that too. I realized that if you're not going to be skeptical and be outspoken in this world, you're going to get run over. And that's what happened the last couple of years. And I feel pretty strongly about that you should be looking at everything, regardless of whether it's a corporation or a government or whoever it is. Like, there's nothing wrong with being skeptical, and taking something at face value in this world, I think, is a dangerous thing. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a conspiracy theorist or all that nonsense, but I do look at things very, very differently than what I did a few years ago, and it's been very empowering for me to do that. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that when you can look at things more critically, and you don't take other people's opinions as factual, I think that really allows you for some deep reflection, and it also helps you to like figure out how you think. And going back to building that self-belief and spending time alone, when you're bombarded by, whether it's Netflix, social media, relationships at work, whatever it is, like, we're constantly receiving all these inputs all day long from other people's ideas and other people's opinions. And if we don't know what we think and how we feel about situations, and we don't spend time thinking about those things, then we're going to be very easily swayed one way or the other. And then other people's opinions become ours very, very quickly.
There's some strong emotions that what you're saying evokes for me, that I'm spent a while emoting to others and on this podcast. And that is, society wants us to be castrated. Society wants us to be quiet, right? They don't want you at your job to step up and say, hey, I don't like that. Right? They don't want you to ask for the exemption. They just want you to play the game the way that they say, and they want you to follow that course the way that they say. And that's that, because now you're easier to control. If you're not thinking, you're easier to control. And so when you brought up, things like, I was thinking more critically, well, that's dangerous to other places. That's dangerous to other people. And, to go to Jordan Peterson, and I don't necessarily want to get all like hoorah with it, but I do agree that as men, we need to be dangerous. We need to be and I take it more to like the ancient Greeks, and that is, we need to be dangerous with our spirituality, our mentality, right? And our physicality. All of those things need to be there. They need to be sharp because that's how we lead. That's how we lead our families. That's how we lead our children. That's how we lead our communities. And if we don't have that, we're just flaccid. And I think that's the problem with a lot of men nowadays is they've forgotten that side of them and they don't know where to run whenever they have something that they're faced with. They just go, oh, okay, fine. Yeah. No, I'll do this now. And I have an overall and have always had a fundamental issue with that because I myself, to my detriment and to a strong point, I've never been afraid to voice my opinion. It's gotten me in trouble. I've lost jobs because of it too. But I would rather that than sit back and have this life that is just vanilla. And I think I've got to a stage in my life where I forgot. I wanted to play it safe. I wanted to have the normalcy that life was pumping into us. And those were some of the most miserable years of my life. They were absolutely some of the most miserable. And so when I started doing Navigating the Intentional Life, all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, there's doors now opening up that I had never known that I didn't know. And that is in this arena of trying to motivate other men, trying to help other men see and remember their voice, literally and figuratively speaking, remembering their voice, so they find that confidence again. So they have that self-belief again to say, screw this shit, man. Look, and we don't have to align on the same fronts. Like I'm a Christian man. I've had people walk away from my groups because they said, well, you guys talk about faith too much. Or these guys talk about this is their cornerstone or their foundation. And it's like, okay, cool. If that offends you, go. Like, I don't care if you're atheist, agnostic, hug trees, Christian, doesn't matter to me. You got a solid belief system. You want to help other guys find the same. Let's go. I'll ride with you. But we forget that. And I know for you, when you started stepping in this arena with your podcast, with your brother, that's opened those doors. And that kind of leads into Boyd Myers, cartoon character that is Boyd Myers. You guys have some shit going on that's pretty exciting, right? And the first thing that we haven't done is, tell my listeners the name of your podcast for one. I mean, all this information is going to be listed, but the name of your podcast. And then, I don't want to jump too far ahead because I think we were on a nice path there, but I do want to be able to get to the point where your podcast has led into some pretty big things for you that's coming up. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So the podcast is Brother to Brother, the number 2, all one word. And, it's one of those things that it's really hard to believe, you read all the time, you can change your life in 6 months, but I've seen it, like I've lived it. And I think it can go both directions. I mean, you can absolutely burn your house to the ground in 6 months, but you can also build the whole thing completely over again. And I firmly believe that when we started that podcast in October, that was the big actionable step that's going to change everything. So at this point now, we've stepped out. My brother and I are doing our first men's group. We'll start next week, and we're actually organizing our next one for August already. So if anybody's out there looking to get involved, reach out to either one of us. We'd love to kind of have that conversation. But Boyd, I mean, it's crazy to me, how things happen. I don't even know how we crossed paths on Twitter, but I think it was one of his crazy messages where he's driving down the road and, I think I commented on something related to Iron Man and, I think one of us followed the other and then vice versa or whatever. And I reached out to him one day, I've been just trying to connect with people and have some conversations. This is probably back in, I don't know, February or March, something like that. And so we got on the phone for a few minutes and, it's one of those things. I feel like we see the world very, very similar. We just approach it a little bit differently. I feel like I'm a little bit more quieter, soft-spoken guy. Whereas, what I love is that he comes at you raw and unfiltered, but you know exactly what you're getting. And that really is something that's really important to me, is just surrounding myself with like-minded men who just don't have time for the bullshit and are here to be authentic and to provide that value and call you out when you need to be called out. And one of the first things he did was he told me to get on video. He said, you gotta take a video yourself. And he's like, I don't even care what you say. And I don't even remember what I said. But that was like that day. And I mean, I had been doing the podcast and all that stuff for a few months at that point, but just being on video is definitely something that is very, very different, especially when you know that you're going to be putting it out from there.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just started having conversations, and one thing led to another, and we had a Zoom call for, he's got that whole crew doing Waco, and I feel very confident in what I bring to the table when it comes to Ironman. I've never finished every one that I've done. I've finished, just one of them was just over 11 hours, but I've broken 10 5 different times, and I've never DQ'd, or I've never DNF'd, I should say. And so there's a lot of experience that I have, and I just like to share it with those people that are trying to get started, because it's a pretty daunting task the first go around. There's so much equipment. There's so much time on the course for there to be problems, and just to be able to think through those small details, so you at least have a general idea what to expect. And so him and we did a Zoom call, and we had probably 25 or 30 guys. And again, this is all timing, but the unbelievable part about that is that Zoom call was that was the first time I'd really talked about Ironman again in front of an audience in quite a while. It was the night before I got fired. And the fact that
Zoom call, by the way,
like that
was crazy.
And it just changed. It changed my whole perspective, because it was like, I remember how that felt, having that conversation, and just how much I missed being around that group of people, and people just trying to push themselves to the next limit, and then being able to provide that group some value. And then to have that happen the next day, I was like, yep, that was definitely God's way of like preparing me for and building me up before, something was about to go down.
Yeah.
And so I just used that as like a launching pad. And so we continued some more conversations, and I live in an area here in South Carolina where it's fairly rural. We have some beautiful lakes and some beautiful roads. And so we just decided we're going to put together a little training camp. And so we're going to be starting that in September, getting some guys in. And kind of the Ironman thing has sort of come full circle. I left it because it was becoming too much of my identity and kind of a selfish act. And now I see it as an opportunity to be able to lead people and use my previous experiences and use I hate the word journey, but to this point, to bring people together and build tribe, and to make it, make it about something bigger than myself. So that ultimately is my big goal, is tribe building, creating men and building men. And, some of that will be Ironman related, some of that won't be, but ultimately it's all about just building that community, because if you can take one or two guys who have that self-belief, and they can go ahead and light the torch for those guys around them, and they can take those back into their communities. That's how you change the world, as far as I'm concerned. It only takes a couple of sparks for there to be some major change that happens.
Absolutely. And I bring up that night with that Zoom call, because that's I got some friends, they call it God incidents, right? It's no coincidence that call happened, and then the next day played out the way that it did. But I was also on that call. And the reason I said that was, not to toot my own horn, but because speaking to a group like that is not easy, especially with technology and all the things that can go wrong with technology based on where people are at. And what I remember is Boyd was having one hell of a night trying to get his shit to work. And so you guys had a plan, you had an itinerary that you were going off of, that you'd obviously put time and energy into laying it out, like, okay, I'm going to speak on this, Boyd's going to speak on this, we might lay it open to another guy over here. And it all went to shit because Boyd's stuff wasn't working. And so you had to run the call. And then, I mean, you stepped into it very well. I've never done Ironman. It's something that I've kind of started to toy with, because, man, I've always hated running. I mean, I grew up playing soccer and all these sports, and, played soccer after I was 18 and all that. But to just run, it never made sense to me. You know what I mean? Not only that, but like I had this stupid thought of it. It was like most races start at the same spot that it ends in. So it's like if I just do a circle, I don't need to run 7 miles, 10 miles. Like I'm done already, done. There's no point. But anyway, I'm listening to that conversation that night, having no damn clue. I'm just starting to look at bikes and do I wear bibs or do I wear riding shorts? What kind of shoes do I run in because I got flat feet? Like, I'm just trying to get this information. I'm interested in the call, but then to see how you guys handled it. And then I see this opportunity that you guys are putting together in September and the stuff that you're doing with your brother. And that's the stuff. That's where the point that I'm trying to make with all this rambling is you started one thing and you kind of look at where it's gone. You didn't probably plan out that you were going to do these men's trips, for Ironman or whatever, because now it is an opportunity. You're building a community. And yeah, it's like-minded individuals and it's probably guys that have all this experience, but also guys like myself that it may be their first time. And now you're able to have these conversations. And to your point, that's what it's about right there, man. Like that's the power of voice that you started with the podcast with your brother. And now look at this, I know you don't like the word journey, but look at the journey that you've been on to be able to go in September. You have an opportunity to really change some lives. I mean, that's really where it's at.
Yeah, and I think that's what drives me every day now is it's no longer being controlled by fear, it's being controlled by purpose. And that mindset shift that's taken place in a relatively short period of time, I don't think it can be understated. Like I can't believe where I was a year ago today compared to where I am right now. And I think that's something that I just want to continue to encourage people is like, it doesn't matter how far down you feel right now. Like it can change in much, much less time than you even imagine. And I've seen that play out, not just with myself, but other guys, some of the guys that we've had on the podcast over the past few weeks and few months, like just were in much, much darker places than even I was. And what they've been able to dig themselves out of, and now the way that they're using their message to be able to build men, and whether it's overcoming things like addiction or pornography or whatever it is, just to be able to rewrite their story and build that self-belief. And the two biggest things that I keep gravitating back to is action. You mentioned like we didn't know we'd be. Absolutely not. I had no idea that right now I'd be called to be leading men's groups and trying to create Ironman retreats and things like that. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I just know that I needed to get on the microphone, start talking about some things, and I don't even know what happens to our podcast. No clue. All I know is we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep networking and communicating with people. And it's really just served as an opportunity to build a tribe. Because for me, I'm not from this area of South Carolina. I'm from Wisconsin. And so, coming into it's a beautiful area, but it's rural and it's a little bit more isolated, if that makes any sense. You don't have a lot of people that are just moving into this area that are coming from kind of similar situations where they're new and they're trying to kind of build that community. A lot of these people have their community already built before we even got here. So you always feel like you're kind of breaking in, and you always feel like you're kind of a few steps behind. And that's sort of where I was for a few years. And then I stopped trying. Like I seriously just stopped trying. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to hang out with my family and I'm going to work, because I struggle to have conversations with people when it comes to all they want to do is talk about sports and going to the bar. Like it just got old. Like I didn't want to have those conversations anymore. And I wanted to talk about stuff like this, but you always felt like you couldn't quite get into that. And so being able to find those like-minded individuals, and they are out there. You might have to get on a Zoom call. You might have to send a direct message to people, get on the phone with them. But there is no substitute for being able to have conversations with like-minded people who can build each other up. I mean, you need to figure out who you are, and you need to do that in some level of isolation and be able to reflect. But then once you figure out who you are, you need to be able to connect with people. And if you can do those two things, I mean, you just become limitless at that point. And so that's probably the Go ahead.
That's honestly super strong. And in some ways, I almost want to push the mic away and go, if that's what everybody takes from this podcast, that's 100% brilliant and where it needs to be, because finding that voice can be as simple as you don't have to have it all together right away. And I think a lot of people get that confused, and it slows them down, if not makes them, paralyzed in their own lives, because they go, well, I'm on step 0, but I'm thinking about step 115. It's like, no, focus on that first one, right? Because after that first one, you might find that it's easier to get to step 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And a lot of the times that just comes down to one, that action of doing, but that action can be asking a question. That action can be reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, I'm thinking about this. It seems like you're in this area that I want to venture into. What can you tell me about it? If I want to do Ironman, I didn't think about things like, what is it called? Your food, like your second bag or your food bag, or like maybe you need to pack this and pack extra socks, or don't pack socks, or, like all these things that you guys started talking about. I was like, holy shit, this is a whole new thing. I'm just going to put on my shit. I'm going to swim. I'm going to ride my bike, and I'm going to run. That's it. Good to go. Didn't think about any of that stuff. And so that's to the point of that, is to say, ask the question. That's what got me going. That's what got me to the point where I'm sitting down with you, is reaching out to guys that I saw that were doing it. I wasn't really sure where I was going, and maybe I didn't have my full voice yet. I think back to my first couple podcasts, and I go, I think I was doing my best Jocko Willink impression at the time, like with the breathing and the pausing. And, I was like, what the fuck is this? Like I sound like a fucking circus act right now, but it's all part of the process. You know what I mean? And man, that's the stuff that's fun. I do a cigar room. We call it the cigar room. I don't smoke cigars. I don't like them. They've always made me green. But I started with a buddy who has since moved on to other things. But the name stayed. I didn't plan to do that. I didn't plan to do that. So, and these other areas that it's taken me, it literally started with conversation with a podcast. And, I find that stuff to be exciting. I think sometimes we overcomplicate life too much. Right. And that's just it. Simplify it. Family friendly podcast, by the way. I'm surprised my dog hasn't started barking yet. But anyway, I just think that's great, man. And I appreciate the fact that, you provided this platform yourself with your brother. So tell me what's kind of next. You got the men's groups. What's kind of next down the line?
You mentioned not paying attention so much to what step 115 is. I don't know where life pivots going forward. And I think that at this point, I absolutely feel called to the tribe building side of things, and the Ironman side of things, whether that be with the retreat kind of training camp that we have in September. I definitely would like to continue to put those together. I think finding that community with Ironman again is going to be great for me. There is still going back to purpose and being able to do things for the right reasons. I am kicking around the idea. It's been a number of years since I raced. My kids have never seen me race. And so I think it might be in my cards here over the next year or year and a half to see what I got in the tank and at least make a go at it one more time. Would love to. I think it'd be fun to just try to get a community with going with that as well, and being able to connect with a bunch of guys and kind of do what, in some ways, do what Boyd's doing. There's a few guys I've sort of challenged already to this point. That's like, okay, if I do one in the next year, you're going to do it with me, kind of thing. And so I'm definitely kicking that around. But ultimately, consistently building these men's groups and trying to just light as many fires as we can. I am doing some one-on-one coaching right now, both in the kind of mindset, self-belief side of things, as well as, nutrition, fitness, and then of course Ironman as well, for those guys that are trying to, maybe just find their way to the starting line for their first race, or those guys who are trying to step up and improve upon some previous results. So, ultimately, just I've got a few irons in the fire right now, but they all feel like they're moving me forward and being able to just keep me on purpose and, you know, give men that self belief back. I think I basically look at where I was 2 years ago, and I'm trying to identify and speak to as many of those guys as I can, because there's no reason that if I couldn't do it, or if I could do it, that, you know, we can pull as many other guys along, to just, you know, build the family back, build fathers, husbands, and just make some real change, because I think that's where it starts. You know, we see society in a much stronger position when men are strong, and you know, it always goes through sort of this transition. But you know, if we can be intentional about it and try to avoid the comfort and complacency on a consistent basis, you know, there's a lot that can be done.
And I love that. I'm gonna cut this off with that right there, because um, I just really appreciate the message that you bring, dude. And I'm excited to see what continues to unfold. Accountability to myself. I'm running my first half marathon in October here in Houston. So I've started that process a couple of months ago of training. My goal actually is to, at some point, maybe I'm looking at 23, maybe for an Ironman. I still got to get a fight. I'm way behind the curve. So
You got plenty of time. I
that,
mean,
man.
if you give yourself 9 months, you've got it. Like, seriously, I've said this before, but if you take someone who has even average fitness level and you give them close to a year to train for it, you can knock it out. I'm confident in that.
Well, that's the accountability I'm putting out there right now to anybody listening, and to you. I've said it to Boyd, so it's there. But man, listen, I've really enjoyed this. Definitely going to do it again. There's so much there. I love the message that you're bringing and the opportunities that you're giving other men to better themselves. It's exactly why I wanted you on this podcast this morning. That said, guys, if you're listening to this, I typically will say, you know, help us out by liking and subscribing to this podcast. But more importantly, if this resonated with you, reach out. I'm going to give all the information that you need to find Chris. Always give the information that you need to get a hold of me. We are the kind of guys that if you reach out directly, we'll love that. We're going to do what we can, or at least get you in the right direction of somebody who can help. If there's somebody that you know, that a guy that's struggling, we've talked about addiction, we've talked about all kinds of things in life where maybe it's just complacency, get them to this podcast, get them to myself or Chris, so that we can try to do our thing for them. Other than that, this is another episode of Navigating the Intentional Life. I appreciate you guys. Stay well, stay safe. Talk to you soon.